Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had already been falling for 3 days when the signal came through. It was just past midnight when it broke the quiet static of the northern relay tower, a warped transmission of broken syllables and long stretches of silence. Operators at Station Echelon 9 didn't catch the words at first, just a low, gurgling distortion that reminded one technician of a deep-sea sonar. Then came the voice, choked, panicked, repeating the same 3 words again and again before cutting out. They are listening. No identification. No coordinates. No timestamp. Just the voice and the endless whisper of rainfall, like it had been recorded from under a tarp or near a creek swollen with floodwater. At first, they thought it was a prank, a rogue signal bouncing between storm-damaged towers, until the frequency was traced to a repeater near the edge of Hollywood. That changed everything. Hollywood wasn't a place people went. Not anymore. It lay in the deep north, a region left off most maps, cordoned off decades ago after a series of disappearances during the 73 logging expedition. No one had gone in since, at least not officially. The place had a reputation. You could say its name in any bar from Meriton to Raventree, and you'd hear a quiet story. Strange lights, lost hikers, families that never came back, and always the rain. Every story ended with the same thing. It rained there even when it didn't, and now it was calling again. By dawn, 5 had been chosen. Not a formal team, not military or government, but 5 who had either volunteered or had been asked because of what they knew. There was Silas Keene, a former forest ranger who used to patrol near Hollywood in the early 90s. He walked with a limp and spoke like a man who'd already left something behind in those woods. Rowan Vale, a cryptobotanist and survivalist, had long believed Hollywood contained unclassified flora. She brought a field journal, 2 knives, and a steel flask she never opened in front of others. Mara Tills, technician from Station Echelon 9, the one who first heard the signal. Quiet. Jumpy. She kept the recording on a loop in her earpiece, muttering timestamps to herself as if they meant something. Ezra Finch, a documentarian and freelance investigator, claimed he was there to record truth. He carried 3 cameras, a weatherproof recorder, and an unshakable smile. And finally, Jonas Durand, the silent one, supposedly ex-military. No one knew who sent him, only that he arrived ahead of time, already geared up, already waiting. They met at the Treeline, where the last trace of civilization gave way to dripping fern and shifting fog. Beyond them, Hollywood loomed, vast, knotted trees wreathed in slow-moving mist, moss slick as oil along their trunks. The trail, such as it was, had vanished beneath fallen branches and soil softened to black paste by the constant downpour. Silas lit a flare and stepped forward. No words. The others followed. By noon, the canopy had swallowed them whole. The world beyond was already gone. No cell service, no satellite ping, no echoes from the road. Only the endless hush of rain through trees. Rowan checked her compass. It spun, then stopped, then spun again. She pocketed it with a hiss. Magnetic interference, she muttered. From what? They trudged deeper, sloshing through ankle-deep puddles and ducking under low branches. The deeper they went, the quieter things became, not from lack of sound, but from the way the forest held it. Their boots squelched, but the echoes died immediately. The rain made no rhythm. Even the birds had stopped. This place absorbs sound, Mara said at one point. Like the trees are listening. Ezra, ever cheerful, pointed his lens toward a tree whose bark looked like folded skin. This'll make for good footage, he said. Scary forest. People eat that up. No one laughed. By nightfall, they found the stone marker. It was half sunken in mud, taller than a man, and carved with runes too worn to read. Rowan bent to touch it and winced as her fingers met the surface. Not cold, but warm like skin. She drew her hand back. Doesn't belong here, Silas murmured. I walked this edge 20 years ago. This wasn't here. No one argued. They set camp beneath a thicket of overhanging roots, lighting a small fire from a pocket burner. The flame barely reached the wood, as if the damp resisted ignition. Still, it burned enough to dry their boots and illuminate their tired faces. Around the fire, no one spoke much. Just a crackle. The hiss of water dripping from branches above. Distant groaning, a tree shifting, an animal, or something else. Mara rewound the signal again, now on her portable speaker. She played it low, just for herself. But they could all hear it anyway. They are listening, they are listening. The words echoed around them like a lullaby, a warning in the rain. Ezra was the first to fall asleep. Then Silas slumped against his pack. Rowan chewed at dried meat without tasting it. Mara sat staring into the trees. Jonas never slept. He kept his back to the fire, staring into the black beyond, watching. And somewhere deep in the wood, beyond light, beyond camp, beyond anything human, something moved. Slowly, patiently, listening, waiting. Dawn came, but it brought no sunlight. Just a dim gray deepening of the mist, a slight lifting of the rain from a steady patter to a lighter drip. It wasn't morning so much as it was less night. The forest remained a silhouette of dripping boughs and thick, ancient trunks stitched together by vines the color of dried blood. Silas was already standing when the others woke. He hadn't moved from where he'd sat the night before, still near the stone marker, boots sunk slightly into the mud, his eyes fixed westward through the haze. Jonas stood nearby, quiet, expression unreadable, as if he'd been carved from one of the trees. Mara stirred beside the cold fire, her hair damp, her eyes still ringed with sleepless shadow. "The signal's changed," she whispered, pulling the recorder from her pack. "It's not just looping anymore." She played it. The hiss was louder now, deeper somehow, as if whatever had been whispering was closer. The words distorted, dragging syllables, the voice now wet, almost gurgling. "Eerie, listen, eh?" It made Rowan look up sharply. Could be interference. Waterlogged signal bouncing off tree density. "No," Mara said, eyes distant. "It knows we're here." They packed up slowly. Everything was damp, their gear, their skin, even the inside of their clothes. Silas checked his map again, but the ink had blurred overnight. The trail they had followed in, the only marked ingress, was gone. No landmarks. No compass. The GPS blinked uselessly. Still they pressed forward. "West," Silas said. "If the signal's origin is accurate, it came from the ridge just before the interior basin. That's where the repeater should be." "Should be," Ezra quipped. Silas didn't answer. The day's march led them deeper along a narrowing gulch lined with cedar husks and strange, gray moss that pulsed slightly when touched. Rowan scraped a bit into a vial and sealed it quickly, scribbling notes with a frown. "Everything here's overgrown, but it doesn't make sense. These growth rings suggest this moss is only a few weeks old." "Maybe the forest grows fast," Ezra offered, trying to peer through his camera's fogged lens. "Or maybe it wants to look older than it is," Rowan muttered. Around midday they found the watch post. At least what was left of it. Hidden beneath a low hill covered in ferns and dead leaves, the outpost had sunk into the ground like a dying animal. A rusted comms dish jutted from the soil at an angle, cracked and covered in something that looked like black lichen. The door was half open, revealing a stairwell that led down into darkness. "Looks like an old ranger station," Silas muttered, pressing his hand against the warped frame. "Wasn't on any of the maps." Mara turned on her shoulder light and stepped inside before anyone could stop her. The air changed immediately. Inside, the smell of wet metal and rotted cloth was overwhelming. The walls were soft with mildew, the once white floor tiles squelched underfoot. Along the far wall, someone had scrawled a message in red ink, or blood, impossible to tell. "The trees remember. The roots don't forgive." "Charming," Ezra mumbled, filming the text. Mara moved to the control desk, flicking switches. The old console buzzed but didn't power on. However, a light behind a steel door at the rear of the room began to blink faintly. Jonas approached it silently. He pressed his ear to the door. "Listen. It's humming," he said. "Very faint. Like a generator." They pried the door open. Inside was a single terminal screen, flickering green, still active. No one spoke as the cursor blinked on the display. A line of text began typing itself, one letter at a time. "WESEEYOU." Silas stepped forward. "Unplug it." Before anyone could move, the screen blinked off. All lights in the station died with a click. Total darkness. Then, scratching. Not from the terminal. From inside the walls. Long, dragging scrapes like something large shifting in a tight space. Something with claws. "Out," Jonas said. "Now." They emerged back into the dim forest, shaken. The air felt heavier, the fog thicker. The sound of rain had returned, but louder, more erratic, as if the forest had turned up the volume. They kept walking, faster now, the narrow trail winding uphill. Later that afternoon, Rowan stopped. "Do you hear that?" The others halted. The rain fell. Wind rustled the high branches. "No birds. No bugs. No frogs," she whispered. "This is a forest. There should be sound." Then they heard it, faint, almost imagined. Footsteps. Not theirs. Soft. Measured. Matching their pace. Somewhere off trail. They stopped. The sound stopped. Moved. Jonas turned sharply toward the sound, rifle half raised. Nothing but trees and fog. Silas lowered his voice. If something's following us, it knows we've noticed. Keep walking. Act like nothing's changed. So they did. 4 hours. Even as the footsteps continued, they made camp in a shallow ravine surrounded by moss-heavy pines. Rowan built the fire this time, shielding it with a tarp and her own coat to get it lit. The flames were meager but warm enough to dry the edge of their soaked sleeves. Ezra set up his recorder on a tripod and began speaking quietly into the camera. Day 2. We've encountered an anomaly. The forest feels reactive, intelligent. Whatever signal we followed wasn't random. It was bait. He stopped the recording. No one argued. Later, as the fire burned low, Mara sat apart from the group, humming softly to herself. A tune no one recognized. It repeated over and over. "Where'd you hear that?" Rowan asked. Mara didn't answer. She just stared into the trees. Jonas kept watch again that night, his knife unsheathed and balanced in his lap. At some point in the early hours, Silas joined him. "It's watching us," Silas said without preamble. "What is?" "The forest. It doesn't want us here. Not yet. But it's letting us get close, like it's playing." Jonas said nothing, but his grip on the knife tightened. Deep in the woods, far from their little campfire, a shape moved between trees. Tall, gaunt, dripping with rain. Its eyes were like hollow knots in wet bark, and it was smiling. Rain fell like memory, soft, steady, soaking everything until nothing else remained. The third day in the hollow wood began like the last, without sunrise, without birdsong, without time. Just mist and dripping limbs and the dull, bone-deep ache that came with trudging through wet roots and uneven stone. Their campfire had gone out sometime during the night. None of them had noticed. Silas was up first again, checking the map he no longer trusted. His expression was tight, brows drawn like storm clouds. He circled a clearing on the map that hadn't existed the day before. "That ridge we saw yesterday," he muttered. "It's marked now, but I swear it wasn't there." "Maybe the ink ran before," Rowan offered, kneeling beside him, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd noticed changes in her field journal too, not in the data but in the entries she hadn't written. Strange notes in her handwriting, describing flora she'd never seen. The last entry read, "Do not trust the trees that lean toward you." She hadn't written that. Mara hadn't spoken since the previous evening. She simply carried the signal recorder now, hugging it to her chest like a child with a stuffed animal. When Silas offered her breakfast, she shook her head. Ezra was filming again. "Day 3, he narrated. "Still in the western corridor. Light diminishing. No wildlife. Subject morale, declining." He panned across them, catching Rowan's sunken eyes, Silas's scowl, Mara's silence, and Jonas, knife still at his side, unmoving, unreadable. Ezra paused on Jonas longer than the others. Then he clicked the camera off. By mid-morning, they reached what should have been a ravine. Instead, they found a sunken amphitheater, ancient stone stairs winding downward into the earth, half submerged in water, the rain feeding a pool that glistened black at the bottom. "There's no record of this," Rowan whispered, lowering herself down the first few steps. The stones were slick with moss. Carvings lined the walls, circular patterns spiraling inward, like tree rings drawn by a madman. "No tools could have shaped these this smooth," she murmured. This is older than anything I've seen." Mara stood at the edge, transfixed by the pool below. "There's someone down there," she said softly. "No one's there," Ezra replied. Mara's eyes didn't move. "They're in the water, smiling." Rowan turned quickly toward her, but Mara blinked and stepped back. "Never mind. I'm tired." They left the amphitheater in silence, but none of them would forget what they'd seen, the way their reflections on the water lagged slightly, smiling too late, blinking on delay, or how Jonas had no reflection at all. The forest narrowed the farther they walked. Trees pressed in like walls. The rain picked up. Somewhere above, thunder rolled softly, not in the sky but deep in the canopy, like something enormous turning in its sleep. Silas kept a steady pace. "The ridge is close. We camped there tonight." "Where'd you learn all this?" Ezra asked, stepping beside him. "How much of this place have you seen?" Silas didn't answer right away. His limp was worse today. The rain had found old wounds. "I was stationed here for a month long ago," he said finally. "Fire watch. Back when we thought this place was just overgrown federal land. But things changed fast. The fog came early. Equipment stopped working. I saw someone, my partner, walk into the trees and never return. He paused. And at night, it wasn't the trees I was scared of. It was the spaces between them. Ezra swallowed hard and said nothing else. That evening they reached the ridge. It wasn't much, a rise in the land where the trees cleared slightly, opening to a stretch of thick grass and a half-buried totem pole leaning at a crooked angle. The totem's carvings were worn smooth by rain and time, but the topmost face, a beaked figure with long stretched eyes, still stared out toward the woods. They camped beneath its gaze. Jonas built the fire this time. The flame flared higher than expected and burned blue for several seconds before settling to orange. Rowan laid out her samples, speaking aloud now just to break the silence. This moss is mutating. No structure like it in any known species. The cells are changing under light. She gestured to a petri dish, where under the lens the moss quivered as if aware it was being watched. I'm not a superstitious woman, she added, but I'm beginning to think this forest wants to be studied, like it's letting us look, giving us what we ask for. Mara was curled near the fire, eyes half-lidded. The recorder still played its message, but the voice had slowed further. Theaway, Ahar, Lestinian ein. Jonas suddenly stood. Turn it off. Mara didn't move. Jonas grabbed the recorder, clicked it off, and stared at her. She blinked. It was getting louder, she whispered. That night, Ezra dreamed. He stood in the forest, alone, barefoot, rain soaking him to the skin. In front of him, 5 trees, one for each of them. Tall, twisted, bark peeling back like cracked lips. From within the trees, faces pressed outward. Mara's, Rowan's, his own. They opened their mouths and screamed. Ezra woke gasping, hands shaking. The fire was low. The totem pole above them had shifted. Just slightly. Its head now tilted downward, as if watching them sleep. At first light, they broke camp. Silas consulted the map again. There's a clearing nearby. We move fast and hit it by afternoon. He folded the map, then paused. Where's Mara? They turned. Her bedroll was still there. Her pack too. But no footprints. No signs of movement. Only her recorder remained, resting gently against the base of the totem pole. Jonas picked it up. It clicked on by itself. The voice had changed. It was Mara's voice now. They're in the trees. Don't trust the reflections. If you hear your name, run. Then static. Silas drew his weapon. Rowan clutched her journal to her chest. Ezra simply looked up at the canopy. And in the trees above, something moved. Watching. Waiting. And smiling. There was no time to search. No trail to follow. The rain had wiped it clean. Mara was simply gone. Her absence lingered like mist, not loud but everywhere. The way her bedroll stayed rolled, the way her pack remained zipped. Her canteen still half full. It all whispered the same truth. She hadn't walked out. She'd been taken. They moved quickly. No one said her name. Even Ezra, who would normally press for a proper send-off or at least footage, stayed silent. His camera remained in his pack. Silas led the way, the limp in his leg more pronounced now as they pressed westward toward the clearing. The forest thickened again, darker, denser, the trees bending inward unnaturally. Like they were leaning just a bit too far, just a bit too much, just enough to make one's stomach twist. Rowan kept close behind, muttering to herself, sometimes scribbling notes she tore out and stuffed into her coat, sometimes whispering names of plants that weren't supposed to grow this far north. Jonas stayed at the rear, watching, listening. And somewhere off to their right, just beyond sight, the faint sound of footsteps returned. Only this time they were accompanied by a low hum, tuneless, breathy, almost like someone gently singing into cupped hands. Rowan froze mid-step. Do you hear that? Ezra nodded slowly. It sounds like her. Mara? He nodded again. But, wrong? Like someone else using her voice. Silas pointed forward. Don't stop. We're close. They reached the clearing by midday. Or rather what had once been a clearing. Now it was a swamp, black water filled with fallen branches, long rotted logs, and a thick coat of moss that stretched across the surface like a skin. What remained of a footpath dipped under the surface, half visible for only a few feet before vanishing into muck. No going around, Silas muttered. The terrain backtracks. We pushed through. Jonas tested the depth with a branch. It sank over 2 feet before hitting soft earth. We'll have to wade. Ezra was already filming again. The moment they stepped in, the temperature dropped. The water sucked at their boots with leech-like pull, and the moss curled around their legs as if it were alive. Rowan gagged as something slick slid past her shin. This moss, it's moving, she said. It's clinging to me. Keep going, Silas ordered. They pushed through slowly, water waist-high now, every step echoing with wet squelches beneath the moss. The rain had slowed, but the canopy above them refused to open, casting everything in a shadowed green light. Ezra froze suddenly. Wait. They all turned. He pointed at the moss-covered log beside him. Is that hair? They stepped closer. It wasn't a log. It was a body. Half-sunken, coated in moss, eyes wide open and glassy, mouth stretched in a silent scream. The features were vague, but Rowan leaned in, gasping sharply. That's not Mara. But it was someone. Jonas leaned forward and pried back the moss from the figure's throat. Beneath, carved into the skin, were 3 words. I heard them. Ezra backed away, nearly tripping. We need to get out of this water. Now. Silas gestured forward. We're nearly through. They pushed ahead, hearts pounding, until the ground rose beneath their feet again, lifting them out of the water and onto soft mud. Their legs were soaked, their breath fogged in the wet air. Rowan collapsed onto a dry patch of root. That moss, it wasn't just covering us, it was inside the water, filtering through it. Jonas nodded, wiping his blade clean. I felt it pulse. They didn't stop long. Later that afternoon, the forest shifted again. The path beneath their boots hardened. The trees grew thinner, but taller, rising like black pillars into a sky they still couldn't see. The moss was gone, replaced now by dark leaves the size of dinner plates, each one marked with patterns resembling eyes. Ezra filmed one of them, zooming in. That's not a pattern, he said. It blinks. Rowan stepped beside him. Photosensitive tissue. Impossible, but... The leaf twitched suddenly, releasing a fine mist of dust into her face. Rowan stumbled back, coughing violently. Silas pulled her away and handed her a cloth. I'm fine, she rasped, eyes watering. It just burned. Not like a chemical. Like it recognized me. Jonas crouched by the plant and burned it with a lighter. The leaf curled inward like a spider dying. Keep moving, he said. Don't stop near anything that watches. They reached a ridge by dusk. Not the one they expected, but one that wasn't marked anywhere on the map. At its center was a stone altar, cracked and leaning, wrapped in vines. 5 short pillars surrounded it. On each pillar, a small carving. A tree with eyes. A mouth filled with roots. A face melting into leaves. A human hand turning to bark. And the 5th, empty. Ezra filmed it all. Ritual site? No, Silas said. A warning. Rowan knelt by the empty carving and reached for her notebook, but it was gone. Not fallen. Not dropped. Vanished. My notes, she whispered. They're not in my pack. They're just gone. Jonas pulled something from the base of the altar. A page. Her handwriting. Her diagram. One of the pages from her journal, but yellowed, stained as if decades old. Ezra stepped closer. How did... Then the wind shifted. The fire flickered. And from the trees came a whisper. At first it was only wind. Then it became words. One word. Spoken in Mara's voice. Rowan. She turned sharply. Don't answer it, Jonas barked. Who's there? Rowan called anyway. Silas grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Don't. The forest went silent. Then, in perfect mimicry of Ezra's voice. Rowan, come here. Look at this. Then her own voice. This moss, it wants to be studied. Then Mara's voice again. They're in the trees. Jonas drew his weapon. Back to the ridge. We camp here. Firelight only. No wandering. That night, around the fire, no one spoke. The recorder stayed off. The forest whispered. Sometimes it sounded like Mara. Sometimes it sounded like them. But always it listened, and always it smiled. The fire flickered like a nervous breath. It wasn't much, just a handful of dry bark Jonas managed to scavenge from under a rotting log, paired with strips of burnable moss that hissed when lit. It gave off more smoke than warmth, but the smoke at least kept the fog at bay. Briefly, they sat in a wide ring around it, each on their own patch of damp earth, packs half unzipped, boots steaming, skin slick with rain and the reek of the swamp still clinging to them. Ezra passed around his remaining rations. Ration bars. Soggy but safe. Rowan didn't respond. She sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her notebook was still gone, and since they'd found that weathered page at the altar, the one aged far beyond its time, she hadn't spoken much. Silas stared into the fire like he was trying to remember something he'd forgotten years ago. His eyes darted every so often to the woods, then back to the flame, then to the woods again. He didn't blink much. Jonas stood. Always stood. He paced the clearing, blade in hand, never stepping more than 20 paces away from the others, his back always to the forest, never the fire. And above them, high in the trees, something moved. Not constantly, not loudly, but consistently. A subtle shift of branch. A shadow where no shadow should fall. A shape, too long and too still, nestled along a bough like some great serpent, watching. They tried not to look up. Ezra turned on his recorder. Click. Day 4. We've lost Mara. We're being followed. The forest is changing us. He paused. Zoomed in on Jonas. Subject displays paranoia. Possible prior knowledge of environmental anomalies. Silas is worse. Behavior bordering on dissociative. Rowan might be infected with something. Biotic. Unknown. He panned slowly to the trees behind them. The lens blurred, then cleared. In one frame, the trees stood empty. In the next, there was a face. Not a person. A face formed entirely of wood and moss and shadow. It was there for a single second before the lens glitched. Ezra rewound it, froze the frame, showed it to Silas. You see it? Silas looked, nodded. It's been watching us since yesterday. It just doesn't care if we know any more. What is it? I don't know, but I don't think it's alone. The wind returned just after midnight. Not a storm, not thunder, just a sudden rush of air through the treetops, as though something huge had just passed above them. A bird? A plane? No. Too low. Too slow. It passed in silence, and when it was gone, the forest changed again. The fog thickened. The trees leaned closer. The fire dimmed, refusing to grow no matter how much fuel was added. Then came the singing. Soft, far off, like a lullaby hummed through damp leaves. It wasn't human. Rowan sat up slowly, her eyes unfocused. That tune. Ezra looked at her. What? She stood up. That's the lullaby my grandmother used to sing. The exact tune. Same cadence. No one's singing that, Jonas said. I hear it. So do I, Silas muttered. But mine's different. Someone else's voice. Ezra removed the batteries from his recorder. The singing continued. They didn't sleep. Instead, they circled the fire, backs to the heat, eyes on the trees. Waiting. Listening. Something moved out there. Occasionally, a flicker of motion, a tall silhouette gliding between trunks. Once, Rowan swore she saw fingers wrapping around a tree, curling inward and vanishing. Another time, Jonas pointed out a shape at the tree-line that blinked at him. Not eyes, but whole portions of its body that opened and closed like membranes. At 2:14 a.m., Ezra checked his camera. Battery, 100%. Storage, full. Playback, corrupted. All footage from the day before had been overwritten with static and a single frame. A blurry close-up of Mara's face. Eyes wide, mouth open, and behind her, the forest. But wrong. Inverted somehow. Branches growing downward, trees bent like bones, fog in the shape of hands. He deleted it. But when he turned the camera off, the image flashed across the screen again. He put it away. At 3:27 a.m. they heard it. A laugh. It came from just beyond the firelight, low, guttural, and undeniably human. They all froze. Then Rowan whispered, "That was Mara." Jonas raised his blade. "Stay put." "No," Rowan said. "That was Mara." She stood and took a step toward the trees. Ezra caught her by the arm. "Don't. You know it's not her." Rowan turned slowly. "How do I know? You think you'd know if I was gone?" He looked into her eyes, pupils dilated, skin slightly pale. Her irises looked greener than before. Jonas stepped between them. "Enough." The laughter came again. This time it was Rowan's voice, echoing from the forest. "I like the way you look when you're scared." Rowan froze, then dropped to her knees and began to sob. Silas stepped beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. "We stay by the fire," he said. "No matter what. No one goes out there. Not unless we're all going." By 4:30 the laughter had stopped. The singing faded. The wind returned, and with it, the shape above the canopy moved again, gliding in silence, its massive form silhouetted for a moment by a flash of blue lightning that didn't touch the ground. Ezra raised his camera to try and catch it, but the lens shattered in his hands. Not cracked, shattered. They watched the sun not rise, watched the mist not clear. They sat around the dying fire, soaked, shivering but still alive. And in the trees above them, something unseen smiled wider. There was no bird call, no wind, no rain. The forest had gone completely still. Silas was the first to notice. waking with a shiver in his chest like something vital had stopped working. He sat up, breath fogging faintly in the morning chill, and looked around. The fire was cold ash. Ezra was asleep, curled beside his broken camera like a child with a dead toy. Rowan was awake but staring into space, hands muddy to the elbows, nails chipped, arms speckled with flecks of green. She had been digging. Jonas was gone. Silas stood quickly, scanning the tree line. "Jonas?" he called, voice low but urgent. No answer. He circled the camp. Tracks led to the edge of the clearing, deep boot prints soaked into the black soil. They stopped at the base of a pine tree. Literally stopped. No turn. No backstep. No slide. Just an abrupt end, like he'd vanished in mid-stride. Silas cursed under his breath. Rowan still hadn't moved. Ezra woke with a start as Silas shook his shoulder. "Get up. Jonas is gone." Ezra blinked hard, sat up. "Gone? Gone how?" "Just gone." Ezra rubbed his eyes. "No one leaves without a sound." Silas turned back toward the tree line. That was when they noticed the silence wasn't just lack of noise. It was wrong. There was no texture to it, no ambient hiss, no distant echo. It wasn't the quiet of the woods. It was the quiet of nothing. Rowan finally spoke. "They call it forest hush," she said distantly. "Some forests do this. Temporarily. When they're listening." Ezra swallowed. "Listening to what?" Rowan blinked slowly. "To us." They left camp in a tight cluster. Silas took point. Ezra behind him. Rowan at the rear, still staring over her shoulder every few steps as if someone was following. The trees pressed closer again, not thicker but taller, rising like cathedral columns into a canopy that never opened. Their bark was smooth and pale now, as if bleached, and dotted with narrow slits like gills. Ezra passed one and froze. Inside one of the slits, just for a moment, he saw teeth. Not human. He didn't mention it. By midday they found the mirror pool. A shallow stretch of dark water, wide as a tennis court, rimmed in red earth and surrounded by spiraling ivy. The surface was still. Not rippling. Not disturbed by wind or insects. Perfectly flat like obsidian glass. They approached slowly. No sound. Ezra bent to look at his reflection. It wasn't him. The reflection had his face, but the skin sagged, the eyes were wrong, too large, pupils vertical. It smiled when he didn't. He stumbled back. Rowan stepped beside him. "They don't copy. They interpret," she whispered. Silas crouched beside the pool and dipped his finger into the water. It didn't ripple. The moment his skin touched the surface, his reflection vanished, replaced by a tree. Not an image of a tree, but the feeling of one, ancient, gnarled, stretching into the sky. For a heartbeat, he wasn't Silas anymore. He was bark and wind and root. Then it was gone. Silas reeled back, panting. "We're not supposed to be here," he muttered. "We've never been supposed to be here." Ezra stood, breathing fast. "Where is here?" Rowan pointed to the water. "That's not a pool. It's a lens. The forest sees through it." They skirted the mirror and pressed on, the hush around them still unbroken. No birds. No creak of branches. No wind. They passed an old deer skeleton, half-buried, bleached white, skull grinning. Ivy had grown through the bones, curling around the ribs like a cage. Ezra whispered, "Even the animals don't make it out." Rowan replied without looking at him. "There are no animals here." At dusk, the hush broke. Not with noise, but with a scream. It was Jonas. Clear, sharp, echoing through the trees. "Help!" They froze. The scream came again, distant but unmistakably him. "Help me!" Ezra started to run, but Silas grabbed his arm. "No. Listen." Ezra strained to hear. The scream came again, but it was the same scream each time. Same inflection. Same volume. "It's a recording," Silas whispered. Rowan knelt, pressing her ear to the ground. "It's beneath us." They began walking slowly, following the direction of the voice. Eventually they reached a depression in the forest floor, a shallow hollow where the earth had collapsed, forming a pit 5 feet deep and 20 feet wide. At its center was a hole. A perfect black circle in the ground about the size of a manhole cover. No ladder. No rope. Just darkness. The scream echoed up from within. Silas leaned over and called, "Jonas?" Silence. Then, "Jonas." His own voice repeated back. Silas reeled back. Ezra stepped forward with a stick, dropped it in. No sound. No splash. No bottom. Rowan was pale now. "That's not a hole," she whispered. "It's a mouth." Ezra looked at her. "I saw one in a paper once," she continued. Theorized plant species that open like mouths underground. Organic sinkholes. Except, she trailed off. Except, they're not supposed to talk. They backed away, slowly. Silas marked the area on the map, though the ink barely held to the paper anymore. Their pens were beginning to leak red instead of black. Ezra tried to play audio from his recorder. The battery icon read, Infinity. Storage, Infinity. Infinity. He dropped it. They camped near a thicket that night, too tired to go further. Rowan dug a shallow ring around them with a stick, whispering old protection rituals her grandmother had used when she was a girl. None of them believed in magic, but all of them let her do it. They built a fire, and waited, and prayed Jonas was really dead, because if he wasn't, he was something else now. The storm returned just after midnight. Not the heavy, chaotic kind they'd seen before. This one was slow, measured, as if the forest were deliberately letting the rain fall in rhythms. Not natural, not accidental. Rowan noticed it first, lying flat on her side, watching the droplets strike the leaves above in perfect 5-count patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she whispered. Pause. Then it repeated. Felt like breathing. Silas didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the fire, blade unsheathed, watching the mist. Ezra, unable to rest, reviewed what remained of his footage on the cracked screen of his backup recorder. Nearly all of it had been overwritten with loops, sometimes static, sometimes the image of the forest, watching itself. One recording, labeled automatically as CMB0217, showed them sleeping around the fire. But the timestamp was from 3 days in the future. Rowan lay where she was now. Ezra curled in the same place. Silas, same posture. But in the clip, a figure walked silently around the edge of the firelight. Tall, barefoot, drenched. The shape stopped behind Ezra's sleeping form and tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally, then crouched, and stared straight into the camera. No eyes, just bark where the face should be. Ezra deleted the file, but the timestamp remained in the recorder's memory. 3 days from now, 2:17 a.m. By morning, the rain had eased, but the fog thickened. Visibility dropped to only a dozen feet. The compass spun in place. The forest had begun to fold, subtly, branches at odd angles, roots curling against their boots like tendons beneath skin. They didn't speak much anymore. Words carried further than they should. At one point, Ezra whispered something to Silas, a single question about the path ahead, and moments later Rowan answered, even though she hadn't been listening. When Ezra asked how she'd heard him, she only said, I didn't, but the forest did. Just before noon, they found the cabin. It shouldn't have been there. Not this deep. Not this old. But there it was, a squat, lichen-covered structure nestled against a slope, half-eaten by ivy and rot. Its roof sagged inward. The windows were cloudy with moisture. The door stood slightly ajar. Silas approached first, blade raised. He pushed the door open with the tip. The interior smelled of damp earth and burnt hair. Ezra followed, camera raised, flicking on his light. It cut through the gloom to reveal a small one-room shelter. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace now cold and choked with wet ash. Along one wall hung a string of photographs, all faded, tacked to a clothesline with rusted pins. Most were warped beyond recognition. But one. Ezra stepped closer, plucking it from the line. It showed a team of 5 people, smiling in front of the very cabin they stood in. Mud on their boots, fog behind them. His heart lurched. One of them was Mara. Another looked just like Silas, only younger, without the limp. Silas, Ezra said, holding out the photo. Is this you? Silas stared for a long time, took the photo, nodded once. I don't remember this. You don't remember being here? I remember parts, sounds, shapes, but not this. Ezra looked back at the other figures. 2 more were unrecognizable, blurred by water damage. One, however, was perfectly clear. A tall man in black, unsmiling. Jonas. He was standing in the same posture he'd held every night by the fire. Arms crossed, blade at his hip, watching. But this, Ezra began. This photo is old. Decades old. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the back corner of the room, where a trapdoor lay half-covered in moss and a coil of split rope. He stared at it, then at Rowan. I think I left something down there. You just said you don't remember this place. I said I didn't remember the photo. They pried the door open. Cold, wet air rushed up from below. Not a basement, a shaft. Steep stairs carved directly into stone, slick with moss. A smell rose up. Not rot. Not soil. Memory. Ezra recoiled. It smells like my grandmother's attic. Dust and lemon oil and... Rowan sniffed once and gagged. It smells like my lap. When I incinerated the first moss samples I found. Silas went down first. They descended carefully, flashlights carving tunnels of light through the dark. The stairs ended at a sealed room, stone walls covered in carvings, floor littered with bones. Small ones, bird skulls, rodents, maybe even raccoons. But each one was clean, arranged in spirals. Each spiral centered on a small pile of black seeds. "What the hell is this?" Ezra whispered. Rowan bent closer to the seeds. "I've seen these before. In the bark of that tree we passed yesterday, the one that bled when I touched it." Silas moved past them to a far wall, and there, hanging on rusted hooks, were 5 packs. Each one identical to theirs. Ezra lifted one. His initials were stitched into the inside seam. "No," he said quietly. No, this isn't possible." Rowan opened hers. Inside was her notebook. The real one. Pages dry. Unfolded. The spine intact. "It's mine," she whispered. "But I've been carrying it." She opened the first page. The writing inside wasn't hers. "We were warned. We heard the singing. We followed the wrong version of the trail. One of us changed. We think it's Jonas." Rowan closed the notebook and dropped it. Ezra turned to Silas. "How long were you out here, really?" Silas didn't look back. "Long enough." They climbed back up without speaking. The cabin's door was now closed. No wind. No prints. Just shut tight. Silas opened it slowly. Outside, the fog had lifted slightly. Enough to reveal a narrow trail leading west. A path carved into the earth, lined with smooth stones. A new path. One that hadn't been there when they entered. Ezra stepped to the threshold. Rowan hesitated. "What if this is a loop?" she whispered. "What if we're already walking in circles like the others in that photo?" Ezra turned to her. "We keep going. Not because it'll save us, but because something's trying to make us stop. That means forward is the only threat to it." Silas said nothing. He was staring at the woods again, jaw tight. "Do you hear that?" he asked. They all listened. From deep within the trees, distant but unmistakable. Laughter. Not Mara's. Not Rowan's. Ezra's. The new path wound west, unnaturally clean. No overgrowth, no fallen branches, no moss. Just damp earth pressed smooth as if swept by invisible hands. It led into trees older than the others, bark dark as coal, leaves shaped like grasping fingers. Every so often one would drop, and float, not fall, drifting slowly to the forest floor as though afraid to make a sound. They followed the trail in single file. Ezra at the front, eyes sharp, camera off. Rowan next, her reclaimed notebook hugged to her chest. Silas at the rear, moving slower than before, his limp more pronounced. They walked for what felt like hours. The path knew they were there. At first it was subtle, a vine slipping from a branch just as they passed, a root twisting slightly underfoot, the wind pressing gently at their backs, ushering them forward. Then it changed. Ezra froze at a curve in the trail. "There's something ahead." They crept forward and saw it, a figure kneeling in the path. Back to them. Hair soaked, skin pale, clothes shredded. "Mara?" Rowan whispered. Ezra raised his camera. The lens blinked red. No focus. No frame. Rowan stepped forward. Silas grabbed her arm. No. But the figure turned. Not slowly. Not with hesitation. It snapped toward them, its neck turning too far, too fast. The face was close to Mara's, but stretched. Waxen. Eyes wide, mouth agape in a silent wail. And as they watched, the body began to split down the center. From neck to navel. Peeling open like wet bark. Inside not flesh. Moss. Roots. Tiny blossoms shaped like teeth. Then it collapsed, folding into itself like rotten paper, leaving only a damp print in the soil. Ezra stumbled back. "We keep going. Now." No one argued. The path narrowed as they moved deeper. The trees here were wrong. Some bent in impossible angles, like they'd grown in reverse, branches buried underground, roots reaching into the sky. Others bled black sap that dripped with the slow cadence of a ticking clock. Rowan marked each turn in her journal. But each time she checked back, the ink had changed. Her writing, but new symbols, curling, looping marks not from any known language. The notes were no longer hers. She stopped writing. At twilight, the trail widened briefly and curved into a clearing surrounded by monoliths. 5 stone pillars. Tall, smooth, carved with spirals, each one etched with a name. Rowan approached the nearest. Ezra knelt beside one with a shaking hand. This is my name. Silas read his own out loud. I don't understand, Rowan whispered. Then she gasped and pointed to the fifth pillar. No name, just an indentation, exactly the size of a human hand. Ezra looked at her. Don't touch it. I wasn't going to. Silas moved to the edge of the clearing, peering into the trees. We're being watched. Ezra followed his gaze. Where? Not where. When? Ezra turned to him. That doesn't. Look. Silas pointed toward the trees opposite the clearing, and there they were. 3 shadows, tall, unmoving, shaped like people but too thin, too long. Their heads tilted slowly in unison as if measuring time with their necks. They're matching our steps, Silas whispered. And then one of the shadows took a step forward. The forest breathed. Not wind, not rustling. A low exhale, deep and wet and ancient. Ezra grabbed Rowan's arm. Run. They didn't speak. They ran. The path tried to hold them. Roots grabbing ankles, branches whipping faces, leaves falling like razors. Ezra dropped his camera. Rowan's journal was torn from her hands. Silas stumbled once, caught himself, pushed onward. They didn't stop until the forest thinned slightly and the trees began to change again. Lighter bark, mist glowing with faint light, air filled with the scent of copper and sage. They collapsed beside a cluster of pale stones. Breathing hard, bleeding, alive. Behind them no sound, no footsteps, no wind. The forest had let them go, but not for long. Rowan turned to Ezra. Did you see them? He nodded. They didn't have faces. Silas spoke without looking at them. They were us. That night they didn't sleep. The path remained just visible behind them, glowing faintly in the dark like a wound that hadn't scabbed. Ezra sat with a twig in hand, scratching lines into the soil. Not letters, not images, just patterns he didn't understand. Rowan cried once, quietly. Silas stared at the sky. I think the forest is rewriting us, he said. Into what? Rowan asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. By morning, the forest had grown unfamiliar again. Not just in shape, in substance. The trees no longer resembled trees. Their trunks were too smooth, branching high above into webs instead of limbs. Their bark pulsed faintly beneath the surface like veins. Some bent toward the trio as they passed, their tops creaking in rhythm with the group's breathing. Rowan stopped and placed her palm flat against one. It was warm. Not warm like sun-heated wood. Warm like skin. She pulled her hand back sharply. Ezra stared at the same trunk and muttered, They're not trees. Not really. Silas said nothing. He was looking ahead. At the clearing that had just opened in front of them, smooth, circular, surrounded by 7 trees spaced too evenly to be natural. At its center stood a massive trunk, easily 10 feet wide, but hollow, split down the middle, forming a wide open mouth with smooth walls and spiraling ridges inside. It wasn't dead. It breathed. Slow, steady, rhythmic, the hollow contracting and expanding like a lung. Ezra reached for his camera, remembered it was gone. He turned to Silas. What is this? Silas swallowed. I think this is where they come from. Who? Silas didn't answer. Instead, he crouched near the edge of the clearing and ran his fingers through the dirt. It was red. Not clay red like iron. Like blood. Rowan moved toward the breathing trunk. Don't, Ezra warned. I'm not touching it, she whispered. I just want to look inside. She stepped closer. The breathing didn't change, but the light did. The shadows shifted, not with the sun, there was no sun, but with her movement. The trunk's interior brightened, and inside she saw bones. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Small and curled, fetal shapes, unfinished skeletons, skulls without eye sockets. Ezra turned away and retched. Silas stood. We're going around. They made a wide berth, stepping into underbrush for the first time in hours. The moment they left the path, the forest pressed against them like a body. Leaves scraped their necks. Roots shifted underfoot. Everything was moist as if recently fed. For 20 minutes, they climbed a slow rise, circling the breathing trunk from a distance, until they came upon a circle of stones. Not natural. Each stone stood 5 feet tall, arranged in a perfect ring. Flat-topped, smooth-faced, burned black at the edges. Silas stepped into the circle. The moment his foot crossed the line, the wind returned, hard and fast, slamming through the trees. Ezra called out, Silas? Too late. The moment Silas reached the center, he vanished. No flash, no scream, no distortion. Just gone. Rowan screamed and ran in after him. Ezra lunged to stop her, too slow, and she disappeared too. He stood frozen outside the circle, heart hammering. Then from within a sound. Not voices. Chimes. Soft, melodic, distant. Then Rowan's voice. Ezra, come see. It's beautiful. He stepped forward, but did not cross. I'm not that stupid. Then another voice. Behind him. His own. No, but you're curious. He turned. Nothing. When he looked back, the stone circle was empty. No Rowan. No Silas. Just the chimes. Growing fainter. Ezra waited for hours. The sky didn't change. The trees didn't move. He tried calling out. Nothing. Eventually he circled the stones and kept walking. It was all he could do. Sometime later, maybe hours, maybe days, he came upon a structure. A watchtower. Rusted. Set into a narrow hill with a ladder of wet iron rungs leading to a cramped platform. He climbed, breath heaving, and stepped into the cabin. It was empty, except for a mirror on the far wall. Crack. He stepped toward it, looked inside. The reflection showed the room, correct, accurate, but with 4 people behind him. All staring, none moving. Jonas, Rowan, Silas, and himself. The versions behind the glass were slightly off, eyes too dark, skin pale, smiles just a bit too wide. He spun around. No one there. He turned back to the mirror. Only himself now. But the room was different. The walls blackened, the floor wet, the reflection crying. He stayed in the tower until the fog reached the top platform. Then he climbed down alone. Ezra didn't remember when the fog began to whisper. Not at first. It might have started as the rustle of leaves overhead, or the hush of breath between his footsteps. But by midday, if it could still be called that, the words became clearer. Not loud, but constant. Come back, come back, come back. He kept moving. The trees had shifted again, tall and white now, their trunks peeling in long papery ribbons that floated like breath through the air. They made no sound when they fell, only drifted, silently, until they touched ground and dissolved into ash. Every so often he passed a shadow behind the trees, always moving just a few seconds slower than he did. When he stopped, it stopped. When he turned, it ducked out of sight. He didn't follow. He didn't speak, until it called his name. Ezra. Sounded like Rowan. He froze. Rowan? The voice came again. It's me. I'm close. I need you. Another voice joined it. Silas. We found the way out. Ezra's throat tightened. He backed away from the voice. No, he muttered. No, not this time. The trees around him shifted, leaning inward. The roots curled. A trail began to form at his feet, paved in smooth stones slick with moss. Then came a third voice. His own. Why do you always assume you're the one who made it out? He ran. The path beneath his feet was no longer soil. It was flesh. Spongy. Soft. It pulsed with every step, and sometimes it twitched. He didn't look down. Just ran until the voices faded. Until the trail spat him out onto dry ground. A ridge looking out over a shallow valley ringed with broken trees. And at the valley's center, a pit. What? Perfectly round. It hadn't been dug. It had been grown. Ezra stood at the edge and looked down. Nothing. No bottom. No sound. Just that awful, endless dark. Then something breathed. Not wind. Something deeper. Hollow and wet and old. The same breath he'd heard when the forest exhaled back at the monoliths. He turned to leave and stopped. Across the pit stood Silas. No limp. No backpack. No blade. Just standing there looking at Ezra with eyes too dark, too calm. You're not him, Ezra said. The thing that wore Silas' skin smiled. Neither are you. Then it took a step forward. Not around the pit. Across it. Walking on air. No ripple. No distortion. Just movement. Ezra stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The trees had closed behind him. The forest wanted him here. The thing that was not Silas reached the edge and crouched. Its neck tilted too far. Its fingers lengthened. Its eyes flickered like candlelight. We kept a space for you. Ezra grabbed a rock, not as a weapon, just to feel something real, and threw it. The rock passed through the figure like smoke. Then a voice came from beside him. Rowan again. Ezra, please. You're almost done. He turned. She stood beside him. Pale. Breathing. Smiling. Too still. He didn't move. There's a way through, she said. You just have to go down. We all did. That's the only way you become part of it. He didn't speak. Behind her, the trees shifted again, not moving but blinking. He saw faces in the bark, mouths in the roots, and in the pit something moved, rising. A hand, but too long, too many fingers, bark instead of skin, reaching, inviting. Rowan stepped toward it. "You can come with me," Ezra whispered. "You're not her." She looked back, smiled wider. "No, but she is here, and she's listening." He turned and ran, back into the trees. The forest screamed. Branches lashed his face. The path bucked beneath his feet. He didn't stop, didn't think, just pushed until the trees thinned again and the fog peeled away. And the real Rowan was there, kneeling beside a fire, alive, breathing, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ezra?" He collapsed beside her, panting. "How do I know it's really you?" he gasped. She blinked, then took his hand and pressed it to her chest. Her heart was pounding, erratic, human. He nodded once, and behind them, deep in the trees, the thing wearing her voice whispered, "You chose wrong." The fire was real. Ezra knew at the moment he felt the heat, not just warmth, dryness, a pull away from the damp breath of the forest, like something sacred, something the trees didn't dare touch. Rowan had built it in a shallow ring of stone, using old timber stripped from what looked like a collapsed shed nearby. She hadn't dared light it until the sun, if it could be called that, passed behind the skeletal trees and the wind died. "I found dry wood in that shack," she said quietly. "It was just there, like someone had stacked it yesterday. But the nails were rusted clean through." She stared into the flame like it might give her answers. Ezra sat down beside her, knees to his chest. He didn't ask where Silas was. He already knew the answer. Rowan handed him something wrapped in cloth. Food. Dried jerky. Maybe deer, maybe something else. He didn't care. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know anymore. Time doesn't pass the way it should. I think we walked in circles for a while. But then I found the map." Ezra looked up. "What map?" She reached into her satchel and drew out a wide square of parchment. It looked old, the kind of old that shouldn't survive a breeze, let alone the hollowing deep. But it was clean, uncreased, inked in black and red. The lines were hand-drawn, curling through valleys and around oblong symbols that didn't look like language. Ezra leaned closer. "What is this?" Rowan pointed to the center of the map, where a circle of trees was sketched in thick black lines, and beneath it, a single symbol. "That's the place you ran from," she said. "The pit." He stared. "You mapped the whole forest?" "No," she said. "Someone else did." Ezra touched the edge of the paper. It was warm. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat under his palm. He pulled his hand back. Rowan nodded slowly. "I think it's alive." That night, the forest didn't attack, didn't whisper, didn't send voices wearing old skin, but it watched. They could feel it, not in the way of eyes in the dark, but in the absence of something else. The way the air pressed too tightly against their backs. The way the silence thickened if they dared speak above a whisper. Rowan leaned forward, pointing at the far edge of the map. "Here," she said. "It's marked with a triple X. 3 overlapping slashes carved directly into the parchment. No path leads there," she said, "but it's circled in red." Ezra stared. "You think that's the way out?" Rowan shook her head. "I think it's the center." By morning, the fire was still burning. Ezra woke to the smell of cedar and something else. Cinnamon, maybe, or ash from something older. Rowan was already packing. The map had shifted slightly in the night, as though something had redrawn part of it. A line that hadn't been there before now snaked toward the triple X symbol. The trail. "Was this here last night?" Ezra asked. "No." She folded the map carefully and tucked it away. Ezra didn't ask how she knew which way to go. The forest had stopped pretending it wasn't involved. It wanted them to reach the center. And that terrified him more than anything. The trail led down a gully of twisted saplings, each one bent toward the earth like it was ashamed to be alive. They passed a broken gate made of vertebrae and vines, and beyond it, the trees grew taller again. Their bark now bore faces. Not clear, but implied. Smudged outlines. The suggestion of cheekbones. Noses. Open mouths. Every 10th tree or so was marked with red handprints. Ezra whispered, "What are those?" Rowan didn't answer at first. Then, markers. Warnings. Maybe prayers. They didn't touch them. They walked until the trail narrowed into a corridor, stone on both sides, grown naturally into sharp angles and damp with moss. As they passed through, the trees bent overhead to form an arched ceiling. This place was built, not grown. Ezra realized it then. The forest's not just alive, he whispered. It's aware. Rowan stopped. They had emerged into another clearing, this one smaller. At its center stood a monolith, 10 feet tall, carved from a single slab of gray stone. It pulsed. Rowan approached first. On its surface were names. Not etched, growing. Letters surfaced like bubbles in hot tar. As they watched, 3 new names rose to the top. Rowan Weiler, Ezra Nemeth, Silas Ward. Ezra stepped back. What does this mean? Rowan stared at the stone, then placed her hand on it. The moment she touched it, her eyes rolled back. She collapsed. Ezra caught her before she hit the ground. Rowan. Hey, Rowan. Her breathing was fast, erratic, then slow, then steady. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him and whispered, I saw it. What? She sat up slowly. The end. The thing that sleeps in the center. Ezra helped her to her feet. And? Rowan looked up at the stone. It dreams and loops. They left the monolith in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because words no longer felt useful. Every sentence hung too long in the air. Every whisper left a pressure behind, like a footprint in wet clay. The forest heard. Remembered. Rowan kept her hand on the map the whole time. It vibrated faintly like a living compass. She never looked down. She didn't have to. The path's beneath us now, she said finally. Ezra frowned. What do you mean? She pointed toward a clearing ahead, a circle of trees with no floor, just a jagged hole that stretched out like a massive wound, sloped inward like a funnel. From its lip, thick roots extended downward into the dark. It smelled like stone, rot, and wet teeth. The center, she said. Ezra stared into the hole. Far below, faint specks of light blinked in the dark. Not stars. Not lanterns. He stepped back. We're not going down there. Rowan didn't look at him. Yes, we are. Why? He snapped. Why would we go into that? What are we going to find? A door? A god? Death. She turned to him, slowly, like her neck didn't work quite right anymore. No, she said softly. We'll find what we were, before we were taken. Ezra felt his knees go weak. Taken. Rowan stepped toward the edge and crouched. The hollowing doesn't kill. It replaces. Every step we take, something grows behind us, with our faces, our memories. Every time we dream here, something pulls a copy. She ran her fingers along the inside curve of a root. I think we're the copies. Ezra backed away. No, that's. I touched the stone, Rowan said, looking back at him. It showed me. We came here before. Not in this lifetime, but in some earlier past. Maybe hundreds of times. And each time we go deeper. We get closer. She stood and turned fully toward him. And each time the hollowing learns more about how to make us. Ezra wanted to scream. Instead, he asked, what's at the bottom? Rowan looked down, then whispered, the originals. They descended. The walls of the funnel were slick with black moss and ancient vines. Roots thick as tree trunks wound around each other, making a kind of natural spiral staircase. The deeper they went, the warmer it grew, not hot but close, like the air had weight. Every few feet, a mouth opened in the root wall. Not full mouths, just impressions. Slits that quivered, teeth that gleamed faintly in the dark. Ezra kept his hands close to his body. He felt like brushing against them would trigger something he couldn't take back. After an hour, the descent ended. They stepped into a chamber. Massive, open. The walls pulsed like lungs. Dripping vines hung like curtains, and the ground was slick with soft black soil that gave underfoot. At the center was a tree. It was a tree. Its bark was skin. Its leaves were fingernails. Its roots curled in loops around old bones. It pulsed. It breathed. And it was whispering. Not in one voice, in thousands. Welcome. Return. Breathe. Drink. Split. Ezra covered his ears. Rowan stepped forward, eyes wide with wonder. This is it, she said. The seed. The mother of the forest. The first hollowing. Ezra shook his head. It's a monster. Rowan smiled. No, it's a memory. And we're the infection. From behind the tree something moved. A figure. Tall. Barefoot. Wrapped in wet bark. Its face was blank, but its shape was familiar. Silas. Rowan stepped forward. Silas. The thing blinked once and took a slow, heavy breath. Not anymore. Rowan dropped to her knees. Ezra backed away, heart racing. Behind him, the walls of the chamber began to split. Vertical gashes opened in the root-veined walls. Inside each one, a body, row upon row, stacked like seed pods, sleeping, breathing, copies. One of them had Rowan's face, another had Ezra's, and in the corner of the chamber, curled in a half-grown shell, something turned toward him with his own eyes and whispered, "You're not done yet." Ezra screamed, and everything went dark. He woke outside, flat on his back. No forest, no sky, just fog. Rowan beside him, breathing. They were lying in the clearing, the one from the beginning, where they'd first made camp. But the trees looked different now, younger, unspoiled. Rowan sat up and looked around. Did it let us go? Ezra sat up slowly. Everything felt lighter, cleaner. Are we back? Rowan turned to him wide-eyed. No, she said. And behind them, from the tree leaned a voice, soft, gentle, patient. We haven't even begun. The clearing stretched before them, eerily still and suffused with a muted light that seemed to glow from within the very ground itself. The circle of saplings that enclosed them trembled faintly, their bark whispering ancient secrets in a language just beyond hearing. Every breath Ezra took was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that had lingered here far longer than any living thing. Rowan sat cross-legged on a mossy stone, tracing slow circles with her finger on the weathered map she'd carried this far. Her eyes were dark pools of exhaustion, yet within them burned a fierce determination that refused to be snuffed out. Silas stood nearby, silent and watchful, his gaze flicking between the encroaching shadows and the twisted trees that surrounded them. Ezra felt the weight of the moment settle like a stone in his chest. They had fought, fled, lost. Yet here, on the edge of the hollowing, the battle was far from over. You said the forest resets itself, Ezra said quietly, his voice barely breaking the thick silence. How can that be? How can it undo everything? Rowan didn't look up. It doesn't undo. It erases. It folds the memories back in, the way a page curls after being burned. The hollowing doesn't just consume the body, it consumes the past. It buries the failures, the resistances, but it never forgets. A rustling came from the tree line, slow and deliberate. Shapes emerged, limbs moving with unnatural grace, eyes glowing faintly like embers in the twilight. They stepped forward, tall, thin figures, their skin mottled with patches of bark and moss, faces half hidden beneath veils of hanging leaves. Jonas was the first to come into view. His face was familiar, but his features were twisted, exaggerated, the smile far too wide, the eyes too dark and empty. "Welcome back," he said softly, voice like dry leaves scraping over stone. "The forest has missed you." Rowan's breath caught. "Jonas, what happened to you?" He stepped closer, the forest seeming to bend around him, shadows crawling like living things at his feet. "I stayed," he whispered. "Chose to become part of it, to guide the others in, to watch the forest grow." Ezra gripped his knife tighter. "And Mara?" Jonas knelt beside one of the trees, pressing a hand against the bark. The rough surface rippled, melting away like wax to reveal a woman's face beneath, serene, eyes closed, lips parted as if breathing underwater. "She stayed asleep," Jonas said, "and so the forest remembered her, kept her safe within its embrace." Rowan shivered. "But she's lost." Jonas smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. Lost? Or waiting? The trees around them began to sway, as though breathing in unison, exhaling whispers and faint cries. The roots writhed beneath their feet, thickening into serpentine shapes that coiled slowly toward them. Ezra's heart hammered. The fight they thought was over was only just beginning. The forest stirred as if awaking from a long, haunted dream. What had once seemed a silent sentinel now breathed with a furious life of its own, dark energy coiling beneath bark and leaf. Ezra and Rowan found themselves back to back in the heart of the clearing, clutching their weapons tight, senses sharpened to every snap of twig and whispered breath. The hollowing's hunger was awakening, drawing forth the creatures that lurked beneath the forest's surface. From the shadows emerged the hollowed, tall and gaunt, their limbs twisted like broken branches, skin mottled with patches of moss and bark. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural amber light, flickering with a primal hunger that sent shivers crawling down Ezra's spine. Jonas appeared from the gloom, his smile a cruel crescent, eyes like bottomless wells. "You cannot escape the hollow," he hissed. "It has marked you forever. The moment you entered, your fate was sealed." Rowan's voice rang out, sharp and defiant. "We are not yours to claim." Ezra raised a jagged branch, the rough edges scraping against his palms, and swung fiercely at the nearest hollowed. The creature hissed and recoiled, but pressed forward relentlessly. Beside them, Silas wielded a thick root like a club, crushing the twisted limbs of the forest spawn. His movements were fierce, desperate, a dance of survival amidst the chaos. Rowan conjured flares from the air, shards of flickering light that pierced the dark and seared the hollow with burning heat. The creatures howled in pain, retreating into the shadows but not defeated. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Roots twisted and writhed, reaching out like serpents eager to ensnare. Jonas's laughter echoed through the clearing, chilling and endless. Fight as you will. The hollow will claim you all. Suddenly, the earth cracked open with a deafening roar. A swirling vortex, dark and endless, yawned wide before them. It pulsed with an ancient power, the forest's dark heart laid bare. A voice rose from the depths, low, commanding, echoing through the cavern and into their bones. Choose. The swirling vortex gaped before them like a wound in the earth, pulsing with dark energy that seemed to reach out with cold fingers. Ezra's breath hitched, the weight of what lay beneath pressing heavily on his chest. Rowan stood beside him, her face pale but determined, eyes reflecting the abyss below. Silas remained just behind, muscles taut and ready, his gaze sharp despite the exhaustion shadowing his features. Jonas emerged from the shadows, not the menacing figure from before, but a weary guide, marked by time and burden. The hollowing, he said softly, is an eternal cycle. It consumes, it traps, and it remakes. You now stand at its heart, the crossroads where choice is everything. Ezra swallowed hard. How do we stop it? Jonas's gaze was distant. By sacrifice, by willpower, by remembering who you are beyond this place. You can become part of the hollowing, or shatter its endless loop. Rowan stepped forward, hand trembling as she reached toward the swirling black pool. A cold fire burned beneath her skin, ancient and infinite. Visions rushed past, faces twisted in anguish, memories of lives swallowed whole, endless loops of despair and hope entwined. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the three stood on the edge of eternity. Ezra took a deep breath and plunged his hand into the black water. Cold and burning all at once, it flooded his mind with pain and clarity, the memories of countless souls trapped, the endless hunger of the forest. Rowan joined him, hands clasped tight, Silas close behind. The pool pulsed violently, the cavern shaking, roots writhing as if in agony. Then a blinding light erupted, washing away shadows, unraveling the hollowing's grasp. When the light faded, the forest outside began to soften. The twisted trees straightened, leaves brightened, and a fragile hope bloomed in the air. But Ezra knew deep down, the victory was only the beginning. The cavern's cold breath faded behind them as Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stepped into the fragile light of a new dawn. The forest stretched endlessly before them, a muted green world touched by the soft blush of morning. The oppressive weight of shadows that had clung so tightly now seemed to loosen, though a lingering chill still hummed faintly in the air. Ezra's eyes roamed the softened shapes of ancient trees. Once gnarled and twisted by the hollowing's dark touch, they now stood straighter, their bark smoother, leaves shimmering with fresh life. The forest was healing, but the scars it bore were like faint echoes beneath the surface, silent reminders of the torment it had endured and the horrors it had swallowed. Rowan knelt on the damp earth, her fingers tracing delicate patterns across the moss, her breath slow and measured. "It's changing," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "But it's not free. Not yet." Silas scanned the horizon where lingering shadows clung stubbornly to the tree line, a tension coiling in his muscles like a taut bowstring. The hollowing doesn't forget. It's patient. It waits. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a mournful moan that echoed softly through the canopy. It was neither threat nor welcome, but a reminder, an unfinished whisper caught between past and future. Ezra's heart clenched. The victory they had won in the cavern was fragile, a first step in a longer journey. The forest's memory was long, its hunger deep. "We've broken the cycle," Rowan said, standing now, eyes meeting Ezra's with quiet determination. "But the hollowing will always be part of this place and part of us." "We'll watch," Ezra promised, tightening his grip on the worn leather strap of his pack. "We'll remember. We won't let it take us again." Together they moved forward, stepping lightly through the softened earth, the new dawn casting long shadows behind them. The forest whispered secrets in the breeze, promises and warnings entwined in its song. Somewhere deep within the woods, a faint flicker of light pulsed, like a heartbeat in the dark, an echo of a forest that still waited, still dreamed. And the hollowing deep was far from done. The forest around them was quiet, but the silence was heavy, weighted with memories that stretched like roots beneath the earth. Ezra's footsteps barely stirred the soft moss as he followed Rowan and Silas deeper into the clearing, where the light from the dawn flickered uncertainly through the canopy. The scars of the hollowing still lingered here, twisted bark, shattered branches, and the faintest echo of whispers that seemed to drift through the air like forgotten prayers. Each breath Ezra took was filled with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, mingled with something older, something lingering just beyond reach. Rowan paused beside a gnarled oak, tracing the twisted patterns in its bark with careful fingers. "The forest never forgets," she said quietly. "Even when the hollowing fades, its shadows remain. We carry them with us." Silas nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness beneath the trees. "Sometimes the past reaches back, pulls us under." Suddenly, a faint rustling stirred the undergrowth. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, faces half seen in the shifting light, fleeting reflections of those lost to the hollowing. Ezra felt a chill as familiar names whispered on the wind, the names of those who had been swallowed by the forest's endless hunger. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a woman, pale and ethereal, her eyes bright with quiet sorrow. "Mora." Her voice was soft, a ghost of a memory carried on the breeze. "We never truly leave." Ezra's heart ached. The hollowing was not just a place but a story, of loss, of sacrifice, and of those who remained, trapped in the echoing depths of the forest's memory. "We must remember," Rowan said, voice firm, "or be lost ourselves." The forest seemed to lean in, listening, holding its breath. The journey was far from over. The deeper they ventured, the thicker the forest grew. The trees crowded close, their branches weaving together like ancient fingers, knitting a canopy that swallowed the sky. The air was heavy and damp, filled with the scent of rotten earth, and a low murmur that seemed to rise from the very roots beneath their feet. Ezra stepped carefully, feeling the ground pulse faintly beneath him. It was as if the forest itself was alive, not just with growth but with memory, pain, and something far older. Whispers threaded through the underbrush, voices tangled like vines. Rowan's eyes flicked nervously. The roots, they remember. They hold on to what's been lost. Silas grunted, tightening his grip on his weapon. "I can feel it too. Like the forest is watching us." Suddenly the soil erupted. Thick roots burst from the earth, twisting and writhing like serpents, their bark cracked and oozing a dark sap that smelled faintly of iron and decay. From the coils of roots emerged figures, neither fully alive nor dead, bound to the forest in a torturous half-existence. Their eyes were hollow, their movements jerky, like marionettes pulled by unseen hands. One stepped forward, a man with sunken cheeks and skin mottled like tree bark. His voice was a rasp, echoing from the hollow of his throat. "You walk where you should not. The hollowing does not forgive." Ezra raised his weapon, heart pounding. "We come to end this, to break the cycle." The figure swayed closer, roots creaking and groaning. The forest groaned in response, a low, mournful sound that filled the clearing. Rowan whispered, "To end the hollowing, we must face its roots, the memories it refuses to let go." The battle was only beginning. The twisted figures pressed closer, their eyes like hollow pits reflecting centuries of sorrow. Ezra's grip tightened around his weapon as the forest's low moan rose into a mournful chant, reverberating through the ancient trees. Rowan stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "You are not forgotten. We remember you. And that is how we break the cycle." The forest seemed to pulse in response, roots creeping closer, the air thickening with an electric tension. The figures hesitated, flickers of recognition crossing their hollow gazes. Silas raised his voice, a shout cutting through the murmurs. "We fight not just for ourselves but for everyone lost to this place." With a sudden surge, the roots lunged, snaking toward them like living shadows. Ezra dodged, slashing with his blade, while Rowan summoned flares of light to scorch the creeping darkness. The battle was fierce, a desperate clash of will against the forest's ancient hunger. Each strike was a prayer, each breath a defiance. Amidst the chaos, visions flashed before Ezra's eyes. Faces of friends lost, moments of laughter turned to silence, the endless loop of pain and memory. The forest's roots tightened, but so did their resolve. "We will remember," Rowan vowed, "and through memory find freedom." The forest trembled, uncertain. The hollowing was faltering. The forest groaned under the weight of centuries, the soil trembling as roots writhed and cracked like ancient bones. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas pressed onward, their steps heavy but resolute through the tangled undergrowth. The hollowing's grip was loosening, but the forest's hunger still pulsed with desperate fury. Shadows coalesced into forms, twisted, ephemeral shapes that flickered at the edge of vision, whispering threats in voices like rustling leaves. Ezra's heart pounded. "We're close," he said. "The heart of the hollowing lies just beyond this." Rowan nodded, summoning flares that burned bright, casting dancing light across the gnarled trunks. "We must keep moving. The forest won't let us go easily." As they approached a massive tree, its bark blackened and cracked, roots snaked out like fingers reaching for them. Silas swung his weapon, severing a root that lunged for Ezra's ankle. A sudden quake rocked the ground, and the tree's trunk split open, revealing a swirling void pulsing with dark energy, the source of the hollowing's power. The air thickened, heavy with ancient magic and sorrow. Jonas's voice echoed from the shadows, cold and cruel. "You think you can end it? The hollowing is eternal." Rowan stepped forward, eyes blazing. "No cycle is unbreakable." The final battle was upon them, their wills against the forest's endless hunger. The ancient tree loomed before them like a slumbering titan, its immense trunk blackened and scarred, veins of dark sap coursing beneath cracked bark as if pulsing with a sinister life of its own. The clearing around it was suffused with an unnatural chill, the very air thick and heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to unfold. Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that this was the source of the hollowing's terrible power, the wound at the forest's core, a dark heart beating with sorrow and malice. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and uneven, roots twisted and contorted like grasping hands eager to pull them into the earth's cold embrace. Jonas stepped forward from the shadows, his expression unreadable, eyes glowing faintly with that same eerie amber light that had marked the hollowed. His voice was low, dripping with bitter inevitability. "This is where the cycle begins, and where it must end." Rowan's hands flickered with flames that leapt alive, casting fierce, dancing light onto the tree's surface, revealing scars and runes etched deep into the bark, marks of ancient power and pain. The heat of the fire did little to warm the air. Instead, it seemed to challenge the darkness, pushing back the shadows that clung to every crevice. Silas hefted his root club, worn and gnarled but heavy with purpose. With a guttural roar, he swung it hard against the base of the tree. The impact echoed like thunder, sending shards of bark flying, but the tree did not falter. Instead, it seemed to absorb the blows, its dark veins pulsing faster, glowing brighter in response, as if feeding off the violence, growing stronger. Roots erupted violently from the ground, writhing like serpents, lashing out to ensnare the trio. Ezra dove forward, slashing at the thick, rope-like tendrils with his knife, the steel biting into bark and sap but barely slowing the advancing limbs. The forest was fighting back with desperate fury, as though aware that this moment might decide its fate. Above the din, Jonas's voice rang out again, colder now, laced with a cruel finality. "You cannot sever the heart without becoming part of its pain. The hollowing's curse is eternal." Rowan's flames flickered and grew, swirling around her like a fiery halo as she called upon all her strength. "We are not its prisoners. We are its reckoning." The clearing was engulfed in a storm of light and shadow, fire clashing against twisting roots, the scent of burning pine mixing with the acrid tang of sap and earth. Ezra felt his muscles scream with exhaustion but pushed onward, every strike a desperate plea to save the forest from itself. Then through the chaos, a strange stillness fell. The roots hesitated, the flames dimmed, and the forest seemed to hold its breath once more. From the cracked bark of the ancient tree, a slow, trembling sound began, like a heartbeat, deep and resonant, pulsing through the very soil beneath them. Ezra's eyes widened. The tree was alive in a way no tree should be, a sentient anchor for the forest's anguish and corruption. Jonas's face twisted with something close to pain, as if recognizing a long-forgotten truth. The heart of darkness beats, but it can be stilled. Rowan nodded, her eyes fierce and resolute. "We have come too far to turn back now." Together, they pressed their hands to the tree's bark, feeling the raw, aching pulse beneath. The pain of centuries washed over them, loss, betrayal, and endless cycles of hunger and despair. Ezra closed his eyes, grounding himself in the memory of those they had lost and the hope still flickering in the distance. With a shared breath, they summoned every ounce of their will, and unleashed a final, shattering strike upon the ancient heart. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the forest. The ground trembled violently as the tree cracked open, revealing a swirling vortex of shadow and light, the very essence of the hollowing laid bare. Roots writhed and recoiled as a blinding light exploded from within, searing through the darkness and washing over the trio in waves of brilliant energy. When the light faded, the clearing was transformed. The once blackened bark was soft and golden, the scars of corruption healed and shining with new life. The oppressive weight lifted from the air, replaced by a fragile, hopeful warmth. Exhausted but triumphant, Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood together, guardians of a forest reborn, aware that the fight might never fully end, but certain that this dark chapter was finally closed. The heart of darkness had been broken. The golden light that now caressed the ancient tree was gentle, almost reverent, as if the forest itself was sighing in relief. The oppressive shadow that had once choked the clearing was gone, replaced by a calm so fragile it threatened to shatter with the slightest disturbance. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood together, their bodies bruised and exhausted, but their spirits cautiously hopeful. Yet beneath the surface of this fragile peace lay a restless silence. The forest no longer screamed in torment, but it whispered, faint echoes of the past, carried on the wind and tangled in the rustling leaves. Rowan knelt, her fingers brushing aside damp moss and fallen leaves to reveal cracks spider-webbing through the earth. The fractures were delicate yet deep, scars left by the violent upheaval that had shattered the heart of the hollowing. The forest is healing, she murmured, eyes distant, but it's a slow, painful process. These aftershocks, like tremors after an earthquake, remind us the ground isn't stable yet. Ezra crouched beside her, his gaze sweeping the clearing. The once twisted roots that had writhed like serpents were now still, their angry thrashing replaced by a quiet pulsing that seemed almost like a heartbeat, steady but subdued. It's as if the forest is catching its breath, gathering strength. We may have broken the curse, but the memories, they linger, like shadows waiting to reclaim their place. Silas's eyes narrowed, the tension in his jaw unrelenting. We won't get another chance if we let our guard down. The hollowing doesn't vanish, it hides. We have to stay vigilant. They moved onward, deeper into the woods, where shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy in trembling beams, illuminating the forest floor speckled with fresh growth and wildflowers struggling through the underbrush. Birds began to sing once more, their tentative melodies weaving through the trees like fragile threads of hope. But Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that the forest's darker past still whispered beneath the surface. Something watching, waiting. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth made him freeze. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the shadows, but found only the flicker of movement, indistinct shapes that vanished like mist when met with light. The forest was healing, yes, but deep beneath the surface, where roots intertwined with memory and time, the heartbeat of the hollowing still pulsed faintly, a dormant storm waiting to awaken. Ezra swallowed hard. Their victory had not ended the hollowing. It had only silenced it, for now. The forest around them had changed, yet the undercurrents of old darkness lingered beneath the soft canopy. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas moved cautiously along narrow trails choked with twisting roots and thick moss. Every footfall stirred faint echoes, as if the earth itself remembered the tragedies buried within. Rowan's gaze darted from shadow to shadow, wary. Even with the heart shattered, the hollowing's poison seeps deeper. Forgotten paths remain, ancient ways carved by sorrow and madness. Ezra gripped his knife, the worn leather handle grounding him. If those trails aren't cleansed, the cycle might restart. The forest's hunger could return. Silas went ahead, clearing brush with deliberate swings of his club, marking their passage and guarding their backs. The scent of damp earth mingled with decaying leaves, heavy with memories. A cold wind stirred suddenly, carrying fragmented whispers, laughter fading into screams, hope tangled with despair, voices from lives lost long ago. They emerged into a wide clearing, untouched by time. Massive stones formed a circle, etched with faded runes glowing faintly beneath lichen and moss. The ground beneath the stones pulsed with an eerie energy, a residue of ancient power. Rowan stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. This place, it's a monument to what was, a frozen memory of the forest's endless hunger. Ezra's heart tightened. The battle was far from over. The roots of the hollowing stretched deeper, entwined with the past and the very soul of the woods. Somewhere beyond these forgotten paths, the forest waited, patient and hungry. The cold morning mist clung to the trees as they pushed deeper into the forest's tangled heart. The air was thick with silence, broken only by distant bird calls that seemed cautious, as if the forest held its breath. Ezra's footsteps were careful, the crunch of leaves muffled beneath thick moss. Rowan's eyes scanned the shadows, every sense alert. Silas followed close, muscles coiled and ready. They were not alone. Eyes watched them from the darkness. Hidden watchers, neither friend nor foe, cloaked in bark and leaf, their forms blurred and shifting. The forest's guardians, perhaps, or remnants of those consumed by the Hollowing's curse. A sudden rustle made Ezra freeze. From behind a twisted oak, figures stepped forward. Tall, slender, their skin mottled like bark, eyes glinting like wet stones. Rowan's voice was steady but edged with steel. "We come to heal the forest, to end the Hollowing. But we need to understand you first." One of the watchers tilted their head, their gaze penetrating yet unreadable. "The forest remembers you. You carry its scars. But healing comes only with sacrifice." Silas stepped forward, gripping his weapon. "Then tell us what must be done." The watchers exchanged silent glances before fading back into the shadows, but not before a whispered warning drifted on the wind. "The deepest roots are yet untouched." The warning lingered in the air, a cold promise that chilled their bones more than the damp forest mist ever could. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood in the clearing where the watchers had vanished, silence folding back over the woods like a heavy cloak. The forest had shown them kindness and cruelty in equal measure, but now it felt as if something ancient and unseen was stirring beneath the surface, something rooted so deep it had eluded even their fiercest efforts. "We thought breaking the heart would be enough," Rowan murmured, eyes scanning the gnarled trees. "But the forest's corruption runs deeper than we imagined." Ezra's gaze dropped to the forest floor, where roots knotted beneath the soil like veins pulsing with dark energy. "We need to go deeper. Past everything we've seen." Silas's grip tightened on his weapon. "Into the earth itself." They set off, following a barely visible path that descended gradually beneath the towering trees. The air grew colder, heavier, as if weighed down by the burden of centuries. The ground beneath their feet shifted from soft moss to cold stone, roots twisting and breaking through like the fingers of some buried giant. The deeper they moved, the more oppressive the silence became, punctuated only by the distant drip of water echoing through cavernous hollows. At last they reached an enormous root, blackened and gnarled beyond anything natural. It pulsed faintly with a sickly glow, a twisted remnant of the Hollowing's power. Ezra stepped forward, feeling the pulse resonate with a cold fire in his chest. "This is the root of it all. The source we missed." Rowan knelt beside it, hands glowing with gentle light as she began to chant softly, weaving ancient words into the night air. Silas stood guard, eyes sharp and ready. The root shuddered, a low growl rising from the earth itself. Shadows peeled away from its surface, coalescing into shapes that clawed and writhed, memories made manifest, pain and hunger frozen in time. They faced the deepest roots of the Hollowing, and the true test of their resolve had just begun. The cavernous space beneath the forest pulsed with a dark energy that pressed on their spirits like a suffocating weight. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood before the enormous root, the blackened heart of the Hollowing, its surface shimmering with twisted shadows that writhed like living things. Rowan's hands glowed with a soft, steady light, her voice rising in ancient incantations that filled the chamber with a palpable warmth. The chanting wove through the darkness, threading hope into the shadowed corners where despair once ruled. Ezra's eyes flicked nervously as shapes began to emerge from the shifting shadows. Figures caught in endless torment, souls trapped in the hollowed root. Their faces were etched with pain and regret, their eyes pleading for release. Silas tightened his grip on his weapon, jaw clenched. "We have to free them. We have to break the burden the forest carries." The root pulsed violently in response, tendrils of shadow lashing out, but the trio stood firm, light against dark, hope against despair. As Rowan's chant reached its crescendo, the twisted figures began to dissolve into shimmering motes of light, rising upward like a swarm of fireflies released from a cage. The cavern trembled, the oppressive weight lifting as the burden of centuries began to lighten. Ezra exhaled, heart pounding. "We did it, but at what cost?" Rowan met his gaze, a mixture of sorrow and resolve in her eyes. "The forest heals slowly. This is only the beginning." Silas nodded, eyes sharp as ever. "And we'll be here to see it through, no matter what comes next." Beyond the cavern, the forest waited, fragile, hopeful, and alive. Though the cavern had been cleansed of its darkest burden, an uneasy calm settled over the forest. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas emerged into the damp light filtering through the trees, but the air still carried a whisper of unease, a subtle tremor beneath the forest's renewed heartbeat. The battle to heal the Hollowing was far from over. Somewhere in the depths of the woods, a new darkness was stirring, quiet, patient, and hungry. Ezra paused at the edge of a fog-laden path, watching shadows twist among the ancient oaks. "The forest isn't done testing us." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "The Hollowing's remnants are like seeds scattered by the wind. Some take root in the darkest corners." Silas checked his weapon, scanning the underbrush. We need to find it before it grows. Their journey led them to a forgotten glade, choked with thorn and shadow. The air was thick with decay and the ground was soft and wet beneath their feet. A faint glow pulsed in the center, faint and flickering like a dying ember. Rowan knelt beside it, tracing her fingers over the blackened earth. This is the source of the new shadow. A root still clinging to the old hunger. Ezra's gaze hardened. Then we ended here. Once and for all. As they prepared to face the rising darkness, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if light or shadow would claim its heart. The glade lay shrouded in a withering veil of shadow, the faint pulse of corrupted life beating steadily beneath the soft earth. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood at the edge, the weight of the forest's lingering sickness pressing heavily on their shoulders. Rowan's eyes flickered with resolve as she traced the darkened soil with her fingertips. This darkness feeds on decay, not just of trees but of hope. Silas grunted, his weapon at the ready. We faced worse. We'll tear it out root and all. Ezra felt the chill of the air seep into his bones as they stepped forward. The deeper they moved into the glade, the more the trees seemed to lean inward, their branches like grasping hands trying to hold on to what remained. Shadows danced just beyond the edges of vision, flickers of shapes and whispers that threatened to unravel their focus. A sudden movement startled them. A figure, cloaked in tattered bark and leaves, emerged from the gloom. Its eyes glowed with a cold fire, ancient and unreadable. You tread where balance falters, the figure intoned, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. The hollowing is not easily undone. Rowan squared her shoulders. Then we'll fight for that balance, even if it means walking through shadow. The figure nodded slowly, then melted back into the forest's dark embrace, leaving behind a trail of chilling silence. Ezra swallowed hard. The path ahead was darker than ever, but their resolve burned brighter. The hollowing's hold was waning, but its final grasp was still within reach. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches twisting like claws against the dimming light. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas stood on the precipice of the glade, the corrupted heart of the hollowing pulsing beneath the earth like a wound refusing to heal. The air was thick with decay and desperation, the scent of rotting leaves and cold stone heavy in their lungs. Shadows flickered and writhed, whispers of ancient pain carried on the breeze. Ezra tightened his grip on his weapon, muscles coiled with tension. This is it. The final root. The last trace of the hollowing's curse. Rowan nodded, flames flickering along her fingers, lighting the darkness like a beacon. We have to end this now before it spreads. Silas took a deep breath, stepping forward. For the forest. For those lost. Together they advanced, the ground trembling beneath their feet as the corrupted root pulsed with dark energy. The earth cracked open, and from the fissure erupted tendrils of shadow, writhing like serpents seeking to drag them down. The battle was fierce and desperate, light against shadow, hope against despair. Ezra's blade sang through the air, Rowan's flames blazed with fierce intensity, and Silas's strength held the tide at bay. The forest trembled as the darkness fought to hold its last breath, but their resolve was unyielding. With a final, shattering strike, the corrupted roots snapped, and the glade was bathed in a brilliant light that chased the shadows away. Silence fell, deep and complete. The hollowing was no more. The forest stood silent, bathed in the soft glow of dawn's first light. Ezra, Rowan, and Silas emerged from the shattered glade, their bodies weary but their hearts unburdened for the first time in what felt like forever. The last remnants of the hollowing had been severed, the cursed roots torn from the earth, and a fragile peace settled over the woods. Birdsong returned, delicate and tentative, weaving through the branches like threads of hope. The trees seemed to breathe anew, leaves shimmering with fresh life, their bark warm beneath the touch. Ezra took a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs, and for a moment he dared to believe the nightmare was over. Rowan smiled, a rare light breaking through her tired eyes. The forest will heal. It always does. Silas nodded, his gaze sweeping the horizon. But healing takes time, and we must be its guardians. As they walked the winding paths home, the forest whispered around them, not with menace but with promise. New roots would take hold, spreading slowly beneath the soil, carrying with them the memory of what had been and the hope for what might be. The hollowing deep was no longer a place of darkness, but a testament to resilience, to the enduring strength found in light, in courage, and in the bonds forged through struggle. And though the past would never fully fade, it would no longer define the future. The forest lived and so did they.